Everyone who is old enough remembers where they were on September 11th, 2001. When the first plane hit the first tower, most people thought it was a mistake. When another plane hit the second tower, the third plane hit the Pentagon, a horrific realization set in. The United States of America was under attack. After a decade of peace and security, the world is ushered into a new era of fear, uncertainty, and bloodshed. This era is the War on Terror, and began with the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan. At the time, there was little to no dispute as to whether or not a war would be necessary. Now, after 17 years of fighting and limited success, it has grown to new levels of controversy. Though the war has come under intense scrutiny, the war in Afghanistan is nevertheless of the utmost importance. Who are these people that dared attack the most powerful country in the world? Where are they from? Why would they do such a thing? Why do they hate us? These are some of the questions that have been asked by Americans in the aftermath of 9/11, and then some answers have been produced and become popular regardless of their truth value. Many are quick to cite the Islamic faith as one that indoctrinates all of its followers into an intense hatred against America. Others will point to American intervention in Saudi Arabia in 1991 by stationing troops on Arabian soil. But to look at this more closely, we have to look at some of the history that precedes even 1991. Osama bin Laden, unlike his followers who later ingeniously brainwashed, was a member of the upper echelon of Saudi Arabian society. As a child, he became heavily invested in fundamental Islamist philosophy at an early age. He read the Islamist thinkers such as Sayyid Qutb, and became infatuated with the idea of creating an Islamic caliphate bent on overpowering the West. He learned to hate America, the greatest of the powers, seeing them as the cause of all the problems in the Middle East that were often more the faults of Middle Eastern governments. But being so outspoken against the United States was a very dangerous thing, and his colleague Ayman al-Zawahiri knew this. Around 1990, he formed Al-Qaeda. After years of harassment and declaration of war against the United States, Al-Qaeda launched an attack of greater proportions on 9/11. This is the last straw for the United States, and they could no longer ignore bin Laden and his group of elite terrorists. The U.S. traced the attack to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, where they were under protection of another Islamist group, the Taliban. With extreme precision, the United States invaded, removed the Taliban from Afghanistan, and weakened Al-Qaeda. In the aftermath of 9/11, again, the U.S. support of intervention was nearly unanimous. In the years following, however, Americans of all philosophical and theological backgrounds began to doubt the justice of the war. So how should a Christian view war? For over 1,000 years, theologians have asked this question, and the concept of just war theory has emerged, including the likes of Augustine, Aquinas, and James Childress. The points of just war theory are just cause, proper authority, motive of love, last resort, and prospect of success. The first point is just cause. It states that there should be a justified reason for going to war in the first place. According to Aquinas, this means that the war should avenge a wrong, punish the egregiously sinful. It should not be based out of anger or revenge, but should be a righteous punishment and destruction of evil. As Augustine puts it, a just war is wont to be described as one that avenges wrongs, when a nation or state has to be punished for refusing to make amends for the wrongs inflicted by its subjects. James Childress is more open-ended. He states that the cause should be serious and weighty, especially to protect the innocent from attack. In other words, the cause of going to war should never be taken lightly. Protecting innocent lives certainly fits that bill. The notion of proper authority is simple. It states that one who declares war has that right, namely the government of the belligerent nation. A single man acting in his own interest has no right to declare war. The war should be agreed upon by the proper authorities of the state with the best interest of the country in mind. To quote Aquinas, "For it is not the business of a private individual to declare war, because he can seek for redress of his rights from the tribunal of the superior. Moreover, it is not the business of a private individual to summon together the people, which has to be done in wartime." The concept of motive of love is closely tied to the idea of right intention. Namely, discusses avoiding violent acts which are guided by anger, which is never an inspiration for Christ-like judgment when isolated. Aquinas talks about three ways of right intention: securing peace, punishing evildoers, and uplifting the good. All these things entail a desire to act on establishing safety and justice for the people, one's own society, the society around the world. Last resort states that the war should be fought only if necessary. But according According to James Childress, this does not mean that every option has to be physically taken. Rather, it means that every other option must be heavily considered, and if it's deemed absolutely infeasible, then, and only then, is war appropriate. The prospect of success ensures that a country goes to war provided there's a chance of success in the first place. A country ought not involve itself in wars they're destined to lose. This is bound to cripple the economy, morale, and national security. It is better, of course, to fight when there is a high likelihood of success, which will yield much better results provided the war fits the other categories of just war theory. Of course, just war theory is not universally agreed upon. For over 1,000 years, it has been debated, written on, and upheld, and it eventually has prevailed as the primary means of dealing with war within Christian academia. It has been developed and lauded by the most influential theologians, and for the sake of this argument, will be used to analyze the war in Afghanistan. Though the war in Afghanistan has come under intense scrutiny, it was nevertheless of the utmost importance that America invaded Afghanistan in 2001. The goal of preventing terror attacks granted just cause. Proper authority came from the United States government. The motive of love was evident and focused on the protection of American citizens and the preservation of freedom and democracy on a global scale. Invasion was the last resort, as al-Qaeda had already declared war on the United States and been attacking America repeatedly for several years. Had the U.S. tried other options or waited longer, it's far too likely that attacks in America would follow. At the time, the prospect of success was very high, and the United States could have very easily accomplished the mission early on. So what was the cause of invading Afghanistan, and was it just? After 9/11, the threat became clear. It was far too likely that al-Qaeda would continue these attacks. The end goal of the United States was to prevent these further attacks, but the invasion also was punitive as well. Al-Qaeda did not just attack the United States, they murdered 3,000 human beings. Genocide is almost universally condemned, especially within the Judeo-Christian ethical tradition, and of course should be dealt with accordingly. If justice is to be served in the world, then al-Qaeda and the planners of attack must be apprehended. If there ever was a time for the death penalty, this was it. The decision to invade Afghanistan was not of a private individual, but of the U.S. government in the interest of national security. After 9/11, Congress gave power to the President, giving him the ability to more effectively direct the U.S. military. The transfer of power to the executive branch and the decision to fight al-Qaeda and the Taliban was done legally. Therefore, the war in Afghanistan was decided by the proper authorities. Of course, it is impossible to determine the motive of every combatant in the war in Afghanistan. Regardless, the motive of the entire United States was to prevent further attacks, promote freedom and democracy on a global scale. After the Taliban removal from Afghanistan, the long process of nation building started. As Aquinas would have put it, uplifting the good. This new government was to take place of a regime that had previously hosted groups threatening the United States, namely al-Qaeda. The new government was to act first as a U.S. ally, combating terrorism and other anti-American influences, but also act as a beacon of freedom and Western values, a stark contrast to the rising of violent Islamism. After 9/11, nothing would stop the United States from apprehending al-Qaeda, ensuring no such attack would repeat. Had it not happened, it is far too likely that more attacks would have followed. In the previous decade, there have been countless attacks planned to murder American civilians. It's impossible to predict if more would happen. Simply, the risk was far too high to simply wait for al-Qaeda's internal destruction by their own hand. When the United States traced the attacks to Afghanistan, they immediately contacted the Taliban government, demanding that they hand over bin Laden. After much internal debate, they decided they would not betray their Pashtun traditions, seeing al-Qaeda as a guest in their country, and thus they refused to hand over bin Laden to the United States. Shortly after, the invasion began. In 2002, the mission looked just about accomplished. The Taliban were out of Afghanistan, al-Qaeda had been crippled, and the U.S. had full control of Afghanistan for the time being. Yet after 17 years, the war is still being fought. And now more than ever, the prospect of success is perhaps the most heavily contested aspects of a war. Many foreign policy critics have contended that the United States is further from victory now than they were in 2002. Admittedly, the war has not gone according to plan. The first of these reasons is the 2003 invasion of Iraq. When the United States unjustly went to war with Saddam Hussein, resources that were vital to Afghanistan were diverted to Iraq. The government also redirected their strategic focus to Iraq, neglecting much needed attention that was needed to foster the new government in Afghanistan. All of the war in Afghanistan was a just war. The just cause was imminent from the start, It was decided by the proper authority, and America was motivated, indeed, by the last resort. The prospect of success was evident at the time, however, it did flatter due primarily because of Iraq and the failure of key allies in the region. And though many people are not aware of the complexities of the war, the justice of its beginning is important not just to Americans, but to the NATO allies and the people of Afghanistan. Countless people have died, and too much impact in America on the world has taken place for us all to ignore. Thank you.
So we are going to have a brief Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask of Noah about his research, you can go ahead and ask your questions now. Mr. Waldridge.
Yeah, I just want to commend you on you obviously have a lot of passion for this subject, and I know for a fact you've exposed yourself to a lot of different opinions, and that's very commendable. And I think this is maybe the third time that a student has chosen just war principles and examined an issue. That's fantastic. I commend you for that. And I think I have a lot of passion for this subject too. I think we agree in a lot of areas. I agree. If I understood you, you were saying that the invasion of Iraq was unjust.
That's correct, yes.
We definitely agree there. But I also understood you to say that installing governments, nation building, you view that as an act of love. Is that true?
Ultimately, yes. The act of nation building, especially in the aftermath of the Taliban, which Taliban was a horrific society for Afghanistan, very brutal, very violent, and so one of the intents of nation building was to create a society where people of Afghanistan could live in peace.
Yeah, now my understanding of the Taliban and bin Laden was they were willing to hand him over, but they wanted more evidence. It wasn't an outright denial. Is that your understanding, or you didn't make that very clear?
As far as I know, the Taliban, they were aware that Al-Qaeda was at least involved in they were planning on attacking the United States. That was evident for some time, at least within Afghanistan. It's also very possible around that time, it was actually on the same day as 9/11, perhaps the day before, the Taliban also coordinated attacks against potential U.S. allies in Afghanistan and the Northern Alliance, killing their leader Ahmed Shah Massoud, who was a potential ally of the United States. But the reason the Taliban was, they were hesitant to give up bin Laden it was mainly the leader of the Taliban, in fact, Mullah Muhammad Omar, that it was his final decision to keep bin Laden within Afghanistan, and though that was even controversial with the other Taliban leaders, it was because of his personal decision that they decided not to hand him over.
Okay. What is the difference between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda?
So Al-Qaeda was started by bin Laden. Their main focus of Al-Qaeda's mission officially was, one of their biggest goals was to remove the United States from the Middle East. However, there was also indication that they're more than willing to harm American civilians in the process of weakening the United States and starting a new Islamic caliphate. So Al-Qaeda's mission is international. It's not based on a single geographic location, and is a broad worldwide scheme to weaken the United States. The Taliban is much more concerned with simply Afghanistan. The goal of the Taliban really has been more focused on staying within their own borders, and they're willing to work with Al-Qaeda, and one of the main reasons they did agree in a number of ways. The Taliban is much more local and regional to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
All right.
Just ask
Do we have any other questions? Sorry.
Who are your main influences in your definition of just war? And along with that, would you say your definition of just war goes across cultures and time?
So just war theory is certainly it's specific to sort of the Christian ethics. However, over time it certainly has changed. I shouldn't say changed, it has more been developed, and not everyone agrees in every single aspect of it. So really, my primary influence to talk about, and then there's really Augustine Aquinas, and then James Trill just sort of explains that in a way, and he sort of further develops it, and really sort of fills in gaps where Augustine and Aquinas may have left. The concept of just war theory is so not everyone has agreed on exactly what just war theory means. James Trill just is for the modern interpretation of it, and that his interpretation is the one I've taken.
Great. Any final questions? We need to move on to the next presenter. Jake, very quickly.
So you said that the war was just, was it still just? Because the prospect of success is diminished. Is it still just to continue fighting on that?
Right. So, the nature of the war in Afghanistan has certainly changed since 2001. I think now because the way that's changed is that people are much less concerned with the preservation of Al-Qaeda. Even a lot of the new Taliban fighters, even in the case of 2001, 2002, but it's even more the case now, are less concerned with going overseas and crippling the United States, as they are really just preserving Afghanistan and wanting the war to end. So I think right now what the United States is actually doing is the first time we're starting peace talks with Taliban leaders and starting to take a look at what it would look like to leave Afghanistan, and we're knowing that the Taliban is more considered really taking care of themselves than they are harming the United States. I think it's